Hello, my name is Paul. I'm the executive editor at w.media. And I have with me two panelists who's going to speak to us about renewables, right? Now, renewables has become a key consideration, right, as we build data centers. And where does Thailand stand in that regard? So, Cheng and Paul, will just give a quick 30 seconds introduction about yourself.
Okay, I'm Sun Chen. I'm a data center analyst from 4.5 Research. We are part of S&P Global. I'm based in Hong Kong, so we're happy to come here, visit Thailand, and talk to a few operators on the ground.
And hi, I'm Paul Volodarsky from DFDL. I'm based in Bangkok. I head on our real estate practice across the region and work in the data center projects across the developing markets of Southeast Asia.
Thank you. So let's jump straight in, shall we? So where is Thailand right now when it comes to clean power and grid reliability? Who wants to go in first?
So I would say that Thailand is relatively cleaner if you compare it to Malaysia, you compare it to Indonesia. So in terms of generation, gas has been a mainstay for the last 2 decades or so. I think off the top of my head, I think it's about 60% of generation and coal is about 1/5. So in terms of, I think for local renewables, they have solar and wind. So that's about 26% of installed capacity. So no, it's the difference in the terms over here. So, and the government, of course, they have set up a target. They want to raise the renewable generation to up to, I think, 50% or 51% by 2037. So that's in line with what other governments across the world are doing. And in terms of grid reliability, Thailand is perhaps behind Singapore, is broadly comparable to Malaysia, but I don't think we should focus on uptime here. We should focus on the integration. When there's a higher share of renewables, the key issue is always about curtailment, what Vietnam is facing when there's an excess generation from renewables. There's not enough capacity from transmission lines, so that will causing the lights to turn off. Right, it's also happening in Texas in all these locations.
Well, but it just occurs to me, right? I mean, this we didn't script that, but it just occurs to me that Thailand being positioned so strategically does have more options when it comes to renewables in the sense of, I mean, when we talk about renewables, it's not a trade-off, but rather it is we need to catch up in terms of more sophisticated grids to be able to accommodate that. But with neighbors around, it becomes more options become available, right? Is it?
I think like all governments, the utilities, they are planning for upgrade transmission lines. But again, these projects are facing delays. So the key is very much on execution, whether you are able to do up and upgrade the capacities or especially even in Bangladesh area, we are hearing that it's very hard to get power because of the transmission. And in Ayutthaya, there's so much power being generated. So it's kind of a bottleneck issue as well, whether that's renewable or not. Transmission is really the last mile delivery is really the problem.
But I guess if Thailand is able to upgrade it and execute it well, then there's a chance it could leapfrog the other nations, right? Oh, just filing.
Well, yeah. I mean, this is a similar issue that we're already hearing in the EEC in terms of access to a power supply, a secure power supply, is the transmission to the sites. And this is kind of one of the, while it's been a strategic plan to put all of your data centers into the EEC, you either basically have the outskirts of Bangkok or the EEC has been the target for most of the data centers. And now we're looking at this huge amount of investment coming in. And while Thailand has an excess of energy supply, being able to actually meet the demands of what's coming in is proving more difficult because of the infrastructure investment. And also, we're only in the early phases of direct PPA discussion. So we have now draft law, which is under discussion. We've had pilot programs which are coming in, but the scale of new data center investment is really beyond what has been contemplated in these pilot programs. So in terms of from a legislative perspective, it's going to be key to, number one, make it easier to build the infrastructure that's needed to supply the energy to these sites. And for direct PPAs, you're going to need to make sure that there isn't a cap on the production, because I think the last stat that I have was something like 26 gigawatts of data center capacity being built. And that's roughly the difference between daily consumption and excess supply. So at some point, you're going to need to add significant energy supply to these sites, and having a 2 gigawatt cap on the pilot program makes it quite difficult to see how feasible it's going to be.
Thank you. I think you went a little bit into my second question, but if I may to just sum up the first one, right? Really, what I'm hearing is that there is great promise. Thailand is in a good place where renewables are concerned. But obviously, as we just about every other nations in Southeast Asia, execution in terms of the power grid upgrade is crucial, right? It needs to be done properly. But obviously, data centers is not happening because the demand for power is so high, right? But obviously, it's execution. So, which brings us to the next question I have on my list, right? What are the biggest enablers and blockers to connecting new renewables to workloads? I mean, is it policy? Is it location? Is it interconnection, which will probably be the grid? Or which one? Choose one.
I just wanted to say yes. There's going to be bottlenecks in each of those different elements, right? So when we're looking at the power supply, if we have right now a pilot program, which I mentioned earlier, if it's capped at 2 gigawatts. So I know that there are data center projects which are looking at 1 gigawatt capacity, which means that site, if it's broken down into, let's say, 10, 200 megawatt data centers, by the time they get around to their last phase, they might be excluded from the pilot program because other investors are also going to be acting for or requesting access to that cap. So in order to see whether or not it works, it needs to be more adaptable for where the market is going because it's growing much faster than I think the legislative framework allows.
It makes it sound like playing 3D chess in a moving car or something.
Yeah. You're basically, Thailand is very much, I think, going to be a regional hub for data centers. The problem right now is that the way that we're deliberating and thinking about data center legislation is already behind where the market is. So the legislation needs to catch up to where the market will be, as opposed to looking at where the market was when they started deliberating. Thanks.
The single buyer system with EGAT is very much still the constraint it. So that's not really in line with the global practice where you open up. So thoroughly the framework is to have DPPA. So that's very much to attract the hyperscalers because much of the concern is on addressing net zero contracted renewable power. But the single buyer limiting, we don't have the corporate track into the supply is not there. So you can't really purchase energy directly because that's the issue. That's not broadening the supply or broadening the resources in the market. And as well as the current framework that's being proposed, I think because it's still so early, the bankability is very much an issue as opposed to the typical utility PPAs. It's hard to get loans and financing, so that's creating some constraints and issues, initial challenges that we foresee will happen.
Right. So what I'm hearing is this, right? That it is complex, but right now things to be proved to ease the transition to renewables and to support data centers better. And I'm always sympathetic to policymakers because it's so easy to, or rather, it's not easy to sit somewhere and try to figure out something that will please everybody. The problem is that there will be a lot of people who will definitely be unhappy, even if it's a good policy. And it's hard to figure out the good feedback versus the selfish ones, right? So, but if it were you, right, if I were to say, hey, you can change one policy to just arbitrary policy, you can change what would it be? And bear in mind that I'm really respectful of the policymakers. It's not an easy job. They have a lot of concerns. But from your perspective in the trenches, what would that be that will move the needle the most right now?
So, I would like to just preface it with, I think that the Thai government has done a really good job of trying to bring in this investment and understand what the needs are in the market. And they're dealing with the exact same issues that every country is with data center development, which is trying to create the legal framework around how it's going to function while at the same time protecting local consumers. So I think ultimately, in terms of balancing those two things, the direct PPA approach is probably the most important to ensure that you are both balancing the market needs for the data center investment that you want to attract into the market in Thailand, and then also separating out the energy consumption needs from the data center operators and the general public. Because what we see in different markets is essentially price spikes because data centers have entered into that specific area. So you have demand on the grid is now higher, prices are now higher. And so the consumers that are around them, not just the data centers, but individuals living in their houses, get to suffer the consequences of that. So from my perspective, in terms of trying to balance that, and it's really, really not an easy issue to navigate, as of right now, the easiest way that I see to balance the interest of bringing in the investment and the energy it demands is by creating a very clear legal framework around direct PPAs that would encourage investment into renewables around data center designated locations, like in the EEC. So you have a more direct offloading of that energy supply as opposed to connecting it to the transmission in the general grid and issuing renewable energy certificates. That's probably the easiest way to avoid disputes with the population around data centers in the future.
So in a way, incentivizing direct investments by data center players because they are the biggest user, right?
Yeah, that's basically what Microsoft has been doing in the US is building their own power plants to supply their data centers because there are concerns around the public being impacted and the negative image that creates for the public in those areas.
Thank you. Sucha.
Thailand is because other markets they probably developed much earlier. You're seeing the issues popping up in Johor, in the water issues, and now TNB is introducing a separate category for data centers. And as well as they realize that they don't have enough funds to bankroll all this power infrastructure, so they have to raise the tariff. I think Thailand still has time to really recalibrate their strategy and get get the operators to bring in their own power solutions. And perhaps they can look ahead to Singapore as in how they are forcing operators. That's an extreme.
Incentivizing, yeah. So, right. Thank you so much. I think this is very thoughtful because so there's one thinking is that hey, Thailand is already behind quite a few countries in Southeast Asia. But the other very positive thinking is this, right? Now that Thai is ready to go into hyperscale for data centers, then they could actually learn from the mistakes or the missteps of the markets before it, right? As you mentioned, the recent TNB increase of the electricity tariff in reaction to the huge demand for data center. Now, in Thailand, if they could project ahead, then they could avoid some of these missteps and they will end up in a better place, in that sense. All right, awesome. Thank you. So, next question, right? What are the top site and land use issues? And Paul is just smiling away, right? What are top site and land use issues that data center developers should solve early in Thailand?
I mean, securing the contracts with the PEA or MEA for energy supply. I think right now, because there's so many, and I think the Board of Investment is now considering somewhere around 60, 67 data center BOI applications. Some of those data center applications are going to be, and this is just from my experience, some of those data center applications are going to be divided into additional applications because the power supply just isn't there for, 1 gigawatt data center. So, if you have like a huge data center project, securing that energy supply now, you need to be thinking about that upfront because that's going to affect the feasibility of your data center building. So just in terms of design planning, securing the energy supply for the size of the data center that you ultimately want to construct is really, really important right now. Because my expectation is that the ability of MEA and PEA to meet that demand is going to get tighter and tighter. So the later entrants into the market that haven't negotiated at least the MOU or LOI for the supply of that power is going to be struggling to secure it later on.
I was about to ask which came first, right? The power or the land or the building or the customers? I just say it's the power.
From my experience, it almost always starts with we've signed an LOI to buy land and we're negotiating the LOI with the PEA. Once we get that, then we'll move forward. It doesn't matter for the BOI. Everyone expects that they'll eventually get BOI promotion, but securing that energy supply from the PEA is huge.
I think it says something, right? Because when you look around the region in Southeast Asia, right, or even in other parts of the world, power is always the number one consideration, and almost everything else is secondary. Because if you have the land, you got the building, you got the customer, no power, no game at all. So the story here is this, right? The land issue is not really a land issue.
No. The land issue, because we're looking at the industrialization of the entire EEC area. And if you look at like a progression map, you will see just massive amounts of industrial development in those provinces. And that's where we're also seeing the most of the data centers. Of course, there are smaller scale data centers within Bangkok and around Bangkok. But the larger scale developers are going to be coming into the EEC, and securing that energy supply is far more important than the land, although the land prices have increased significantly.
Thank you. So just sorry I interrupted you.
No worries. I think Thailand hasn't come to the stage where protests or pushback from local residents has become a hurdle. I think it's a great issue in a lot of markets. In Korea, in Japan, that we have seen so many projects being delayed. But yesterday, when I visited Bang area, I was quite surprised to find that all the sites are in between the residential areas. So these are very close to schools, and it's very hard to get power for one thing. I think when it gets really huge and it's built right next to residential areas, it could be a concern. Especially, I read on some, I think Google reviews on some sites that it's so noisy and construction is going on all the time. It might be a challenge going forward if there are too many, because you want to build in certain areas, concentration in Bangna, for instance. It costs, that's different from, I mean, it won't be an issue in EC, I suppose, but anyway.
Yeah, fully agree. I mean, this is something that for the EEC, we have huge amounts of data center projects, huge amounts of industrial projects, and people that are still living nearby. And the constant construction is going to be an issue, but you have secondary issues in terms of keeping the public on your side, which is a huge problem for data centers around the globe. Is you're going to be eating into water supply, energy supply, and all of that ultimately needs to be balanced. For the data centers that are in Bangkok, yeah, energy supply is going to be more and more difficult to come by. So the early entrants, I think, are going to be the ones that will do the best, because there will eventually just not be sufficient supply.
So move fast if you're not really in the game, right? So I have just been shown that the time is up, but maybe I can just ask a last 30-second question. And this is not scripted, right? So have a think. Where do you see the renewables landscape in Thailand in the next 3 to 5 years, based on what you see happening today?
3 to 5 years is still a pretty short timeline to expect meaningful change, maybe. I think we could expect the framework to be ready. And currently, there's also the softening market for renewables for the current political environment. So it's also a challenge, especially for the likes of the renewable energy players. Companies are pausing investment. So probably in the next administration cycle, I'm talking about the U.S. administration, leading the global outlook. So probably things will change, or whether there'll be a new normal, we are not really sure. But I think renewable will still be the main focus. I think companies will always address ESR concerns, ESG concerns. That will be, I think it's something, is a positive development for Thailand, and we can expect a positive outlook.
Fair enough. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, I think from my side, I'm expecting that the direct power purchase agreement regulations will be finalized, and we'll start to see, and hopefully Thailand is kind of a leader in this, which is separating out energy supply for the DC market from energy supply for the local population. It's just that for me, that's by far the biggest risk factor that DC developers need to be considering from a Thai perspective, because at some point there will be pushback if energy supply is pushing prices up just because of the demand of the data centers. And right now we don't see it because it hasn't happened yet. It's a lot of buying land, planning, and not a lot of actual operating DCs. So taking it from where we're at right now, from 5 years from now, I would expect that we'll see a lot more direct power arrangements between DCs and renewable energy providers, along with battery storage systems, as a means of mitigating the risk to the local communities, which could create reputational harm for these DC operators and developers.
All right, indeed. So some food for thought. So thank you very much, Sun Chen and Paul. Really appreciate it. Give that a big hand, shall we?
Thank you.